or, the elves, the elvish people definitely have a lean, sallow kind of look and everything. Not all of them, of course. Martin Chalkis is not so much of a lean dude, a Kiwi actor who was one of the lead elves. But yeah, they'll be very generic in the descriptions of the characters.
Can you offer any advice on how to clinch that audition? How did you get it?
Because the thing, of course, with this casting that's being called for, someone might break through, but, I wasn't cast out of that audition. I then got a call halfway through, 9 months into shooting, when they decided they had to create a new character, and they just gave it directly to me, which I don't know if my audition played into that decision or not. So with the audition, you're not playing normal people. So for a start, you need to go and have a look at the Lord of the Rings movies, have a look at The Hobbit, and also go online. There's some amazing fan stuff online, like there's one site called lotr.fandom.com. And here's a description: Easterlings. There are people called the Easterlings, being of many different races, and people were either tall and sallow-skinned or short and swarthy. However, there was also said to be a different type of Easterling that appeared during the Siege of Gondor. So you need to get in and read and look at the images that are posted on these things.
I've been looking on.
You need to sort of feel like you're that character.
Bruce, I've been looking online, and I was going to ask you, how will it change your life? Because I noticed there are a number of websites just dedicated to your one character, Gambling.
Yeah, it's quite astounding. Tolkien was, and if you start researching this whole Middle Earth gig, Tolkien was one astounding human being. He did this, on the side essentially, but he created the language of the elves. That was his passion, was linguistics. So to justify the language of the elves, he created their backstory, and that's the entire history of Middle Earth. From Middle Earth used to be a flat Earth. His initial thing was a flat Earth that then, after a big war and everything, became round. And,
okay, Bruce.
And Middle Earth survived that. It's quite astounding what he created.
We will go and read the books, but in the meantime, it's wonderful to have you back on the panel. Bruce Hopkins, who played Gambling, Man of Rohan. I don't know, T. Wheeler, what do you think about this? It asks, do you look unusual? What does that mean? What's the definition of unusual?
I don't know, but I love the specificity of the job description. I think in a job ad, it's what you want.
Yeah.
There's a brutal honesty, isn't there? No. I'm just worried now that there's millions of Americans who think that's what all New Zealanders look like. I mean, not there's anything wrong with looking like that, but it must just have a very skewed view of Aotearoa if you've just watched Lord of the Rings movies.
Well, that's it. I mean, is it okay, do you think, Thomas, to put a call out for funky-looking people?
Well, I mean, yes, otherwise you're just not going to get the people there is a brutal reality that movies are a visual medium and that you have to cast for a certain look when it comes to fantasy characters. I mean, it's not like these are real human beings that we're trying to cast for, are we? They're clearly fantasy creatures, so yes.
Yeah, all right. Fair point, T. Wheeler?
Yeah, I think it's. I understand why they did that. I would love to see the police mugshots, but they've been taken down.
Or how they found them, those police mugshots. That's what I'd love to know. Interesting Google history.
Either are you going to audition?
Are you saying we're unusual looking?
I didn't say a thing.
Lucky this is Radio Wallace.
Yes. T. Wheeler, Fuutai and Thomas Pryor, thank you very much for being with us on the panel.
Thank you.
I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow for 3:45. Checkpoint is next. Bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, blooms for Bloomfield. The backlash against Health Minister David Clark for taking no responsibility over the COVID-19 testing bungle heats up. We'll tell you who else is lining up to be Health Minister. St John paramedics say bosses have backtracked on a promise to pay weekend and overnight shift rates. Qantas makes 6,000 people redundant and stands down another 15,000. Heavy rain in Auckland overnight adds 2% of water to the reservoirs, but still not enough. There's record outbreaks of COVID-19 across California, Texas and Florida. And New Zealand football CEO is in for a sleepless night, waiting to find out if we'll host the Women's World Cup. RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Deputy Prime Minister has rejected suggestions the Director of Health is being used as a scapegoat for the government's failures over COVID-19. The National Party says the Health Minister left Ashley Bloomfield to take the blame after refusing to take any responsibility for the recent quarantine and testing botch-ups. During question time today, Winston Peters was repeatedly asked why the government was letting Dr Bloomfield take the blame. He says it's clear mistakes were made at certain sites, but those are being addressed.
On behalf of the Prime Minister, there's no way a general can be responsible for the actions of a soldier in the field, but his job is to find out and try and eliminate such repetitive behaviour. But the general is not responsible any more than the Minister was in these cases.
Winston Peters says the country is indebted to Dr Bloomfield for his overall management of the pandemic response. But the National Party's health spokesperson says the Health Minister's treatment of Dr Bloomfield has been appalling. Michael Woodhouse says David Clark should be taking responsibility.
David Clark has treated Dr Bloomfield appallingly. This is a hard-working public servant who by and large has worked tremendously well through a difficult period, and for him to be treated the way he was yesterday is absolutely appalling.
Michael Woodhouse says it's clear the relationship between the two has broken down. A lawyer representing the man at the centre of the Young Labour summer camp scandal says he will be unfairly vilified as a sexual predator if publicly identified. The now 22-year-old was accused of indecently assaulting 4 teenagers at a camp party near Waihi in 2018. Annika Smith reports.
The trial came to an abrupt halt last year when the man reached a plea deal, admitting 2 charges of common assault, while the Crown withdrew the sexual assault charges. He was eventually discharged without conviction and has now taken his fight for permanent name suppression to the Court of Appeal. His lawyer, Emma Priest, today told the court her client would be permanently linked to allegations of sexual assault, despite being cleared of them, if he was to be publicly identified. The Court of Appeal has reserved its decision. Ko Annika Smith aho.
The Supreme Court has heard that continuing with the appeal of Peter Alliss despite his death is necessary to provide finality to the case and uphold his mana. Peter Alliss was convicted of sexual offences against 7 children in 1993, but in the middle of last year was granted an appeal at the Supreme Court. His death in September has raised questions over whether to proceed with the appeal. His counsel, Natalie Coates, told the justices of the Supreme Court deciding to not continue with the appeal would raise further questions.
If the matter stops now, there will always be that question lingering whether Mr. Alliss would have been successful if he were alive. Having the case heard will assist, or at least get to an ear on the question that was raised when leave was granted.
However, the Solicitor General told the Supreme Court the wrongs done to the victims outweigh any wrongs to Peter Alliss. The National Party leader has told drought-hit farmers in Hawke's Bay they are justified in feeling aggrieved over the government's response. Speaking after a meeting with about 40 farmers this afternoon at the Marae Kakaho Community Hall near Hastings, Todd Muller said feedback he has had is that the government's package missed the mark.
A chunk of the support went for consultants to help them with, water management and plans. These farmers here in the Hawke's Bay know how to farm. They've been dealing with the challenges of farming and at times scarce water for generations. They don't need somebody turning up with a clipboard funded by Damien O'Connor.
Todd Muller, who is holding a public meeting now at the Havelock North Community Centre. The first poll result since he became leader will be out at 6 o'clock. A heavy rain warning is in place for Gisborne and the Ranges in Hawke's Bay tonight and tomorrow morning. A downpour lashed Northland, Auckland and parts of Coromandel last night, causing flooding and slips with that system moving south. Met Service has issued a heavy rain watch for Gisborne overnight with periods of heavy rain and thunderstorms. A warning is also in place for the Ranges of Hawke's Bay until tomorrow afternoon. Met Service says to watch for rivers rising quickly and says road flooding and slips may make driving hazardous. The Infrastructure Minister wants the fast-track version of the Resource Management Act to become the new norm. The new legislation would limit public consultation to get some projects started sooner to try to create jobs and stimulate economic activity in the wake of COVID-19. Shane Jones says the RMA has become calcified.
I think that it keeps battalions of lawyers and planners and various other busybodies hired by local government engaged in activity that's inversely related to economic growth.
The leader of Shane Jones's New Zealand party, Winston Peters, also wants changes to the RMA but doesn't want permanent fast-tracking at this point. It's 5 minutes past 5. And All Blacks versus Kangaroos cross-code rugby is being considered seriously by New Zealand Rugby. Its Chief Executive Mark Robinson has confirmed a hybrid rugby league match is one of several fundraising options being considered, although Test rugby remains its priority. Australian media reports have suggested a 14-a-side match has been pencilled in for December, and Robinson says it is one of a number of options they're considering to boost their coffers.
Is not new. I think the last time New Zealand Rugby had an approach was in 2017, and at that stage, for various reasons, it wasn't taken any further. We must be very clear that our priority is we want the All Blacks to play, international rugby. But yeah, absolutely, we've had the option put to us of this hybrid game, and it's one of many different scenarios, I guess, in a unique year like this that we're considering.
New Zealand Rugby's Chief Executive Mark Robinson. New Zealand football is cautiously optimistic their joint bid with Australia to host the 2023 Women's World Cup will succeed. A vote by football's world governing body FIFA in Zurich will happen overnight. New Zealand and Australia are favourites to beat their only rival Colombia. But New Zealand football says they're not celebrating yet. The vote could be closer than anticipated, with media reports suggesting the Africa Confederation could back Colombia and some European votes also possibly going the South Americans' way. That's the news.
Rain. We had 200 mils over the Pinnacles overnight, and the tide's coming in. So the Cowronga River, which is fed from the Pinnacles, it's at full height.
Trains. Frantic. Nuts and raisins, I called it. Nutty. Just people everywhere, queues everywhere. You could see people were quite disgruntled.
And not all plain sailing.
It probably isn't in the public interest in their eyes to have their incompetence have a light shone on it.
Your Morning Essentials, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight. Tomorrow, Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula, showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain with heavy falls, especially about the ranges. Possible thunderstorms about coastal Bay of Plenty, strong to gale easterlies gradually easing. Waikato to Wellington, scattered rain, mostly fine tomorrow, apart from isolated showers. Taumaranui, Taupo and Taihape, occasional rain, easing tomorrow. Wairarapa, Nelson and Marlborough, cloudy periods tonight, drizzle in the east. Tomorrow, a few showers turning to rain about the ranges with some heavy falls. For Canterbury and North Otago, cloudy with occasional drizzle. For the remainder of the South Island, fine for most parts. However, cloudy periods in the east with persistent low cloud in valleys and basins about Otago and Southland. Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy. RNZ National. It's 8 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Rain for Auckland, but it's not enough. 3 more positive COVID-19 tests from people in managed isolation. St John's paramedics battle for shift rates, and Qantas lays off and stands down more than 20,000 staff. All that coming up before 6, but we begin tonight with David Clark and Ashley Bloomfield. The Health Minister struck a starkly different tone today, showering the Director General of Health with compliments and even an offer of flowers. But there was no apology for his comments yesterday when he piled the blame for a series of border bungles on Ashley Bloomfield and refused to take responsibility himself. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The picture said it all, and David Clark on camera last night directing blame for the border bungles to his Director General of Health.
The Director General has accepted that the protocol wasn't being followed. He has accepted responsibility for that and has set about putting it right.
It's not a new statement. Mr Clark has been saying much the same for days on end, no fewer than 4 times in that media huddle alone. But the difference this time, the camera panned. And there, standing quietly in the background, the man himself, Ashley Bloomfield.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
A crestfallen look on his face, triggering an outpouring of emotion online, Twitter seemingly united in fury at the treatment of the man who had guided them through lockdown. And that feeling only fuelled by an interview given by the Minister here on Checkpoint.
Do you take any responsibility for this mistake?
Well, look, I take
or are you putting it all
for fixing
at Dr. Bloomfield's feet?
This clearly is an operational error.
Today, a distinct change in tune.
Well, I always have responsibility for the whole health and disability system. I take the ministerial responsibility for the system. I, of course, always have ministerial responsibility for the whole health system. I have ministerial responsibility for everything that happens, both good and bad.
And while there was no apology for Dr. Bloomfield, there was a healthy dose of commendation.
I regard him very highly. We have a close working relationship. He is an exceptional public servant. I've said that before. We're very lucky to have a public servant of his calibre in the role that he's in. I have confidence in him.
I continue to work really closely with and support the Minister in his work.
Dr. Bloomfield reluctant to comment on the incident, but insisting his relationship with the Minister is very good.
I just remain focused on, as I have since the start of this, doing the best possible job I can, and we continue to remain focused on keeping New Zealanders safe.
The opposition has seized on the moment. National's Michael Woodhouse says Mr. Clark has behaved disgracefully.
David Clark has treated Dr. Bloomfield appallingly. This is a hard-working public servant who by and large has worked tremendously well through a difficult period, and for him to be treated the way he was yesterday is absolutely appalling.
National says David Clark should apologise. If not that, perhaps he could contribute to an online fundraiser, which is promising to buy some blooms for Dr. Bloomfield.
I would be very happy to buy Dr. Bloomfield some flowers, I have to say, just about on any day.
I might chip in $1 or $2 on that.
I haven't received any flowers. I'd love if people have money they wish to put to a good cause that they donate it to a local charity.
The Prime Minister ducked for cover today, refusing to answer questions from reporters while in Christchurch. She won't be able to escape questions tomorrow, nor the growing pressure for her to do something about her struggling health minister. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
So, if David Clark vacated the job of Health Minister, who could or would want to slide into a set of shoes that have made a few missteps? It's no secret the opposition's gunning for the minister to be sacked, describing him as weak and pointing to various bungles with COVID-19 testing. David Clark's got the job for now, but Checkpoint decided to gauge interest and do a bit of pre-screening should there be a vacancy.
Kia ora, Shane.
Shane, it's Lisa Owen here from RNZ's Checkpoint programme.
Oh, g'day, Lisa.
New Zealand First MP and Minister Shane Jones. Current portfolios: Forestry, Infrastructure, Regional Economic Development, Associate Minister of Finance, to name a few. Weighty numbers stuff. And of course, the unofficial portfolio he gifted himself, Champion of the Regions. A minister not known for being shy. How would you feel about being the Health Minister?
Oh. No. Talk to me about something else than that.
No, you wouldn't be interested in that job?
No. All those matters are with the Prime Minister and my leader. So I've got no comment about having any other mahi. I'm doing my best I can with the curved balls that I have myself on a regular basis.
Hey, how do you think the current Health Minister is doing?
No, nothing else. See you guys later. No other comment about my friend, Mr. David Clark.
Okay, well, let's talk about you. You know what it's like to be out in the cold. You've made a few mistakes in your time. So how long do you reckon it takes you to get back your leader's confidence? And how do you do that?
Oh, no, look, I seriously, I don't want to make any commentary about the performance of a colleague. Those matters lie with the Prime Minister exclusively, and uncharacteristically this time I don't want to talk about myself.
Do you reckon that your colleague Tracy Martin could be a good Health Minister?
See you later. I've got to go back in the house.
Not so chatty today, little awkward. After that, it seemed only fair to ring Tracy Martin directly to see if she'd be keen to step up.
Lisa, I've just had to step out of question time to get this call because it's the second time you've rung me.
Oh, can I ask you
I actually need to go back into question time.
Can I ask you a quick couple of questions just very quickly for the program this evening, please? We can just get it over and done with in 2 minutes. Off to a great start. Would you be interested in the Health Minister's job by any chance?
There is a Minister of Health at the moment. I don't believe the job's up for grabs.
But you've got a lot of quite weighty portfolios: children, internal affairs, seniors, education. It would seem like it could potentially be a natural leap for you. Would you consider it?
If we come back after the election and if we have an opportunity to renegotiate, I certainly wouldn't take it off the table.
How do you reckon the current minister's doing in that portfolio?
I think it's a very hard portfolio with a pandemic that this country's never seen the like of before. So I think it's a very, very hard job.
What would you bring to it?
Having not been walking in his shoes, I wouldn't actually want to say that. I am not sitting in his office or walking in his shoes. It's a very, very hard job.
How do you think the Health Minister has treated the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, in recent days?
I think that both the Minister of Health and the Director General of Health have been working exceptionally long hours, been working very closely together, and as I say, you know, in the light and the face of a pandemic that we haven't had. So I believe the relationship is a strong relationship, but it certainly is. They've both been working exceptionally long hours on behalf of New Zealand.
Just before you go, do you like to mountain bike?
No, hate it.
Thank you very much for joining us, Minister. Appreciate your time. So, a potential contender, although terms and conditions apply. But let's take the temperature of Team Labour. Have they got their health ministers back?
Hey, in your opinion, who would make a good health minister in the government?
Oh, I think David Clark's pretty good.
I think our current one.
Oh, Mr. Clark he's doing the job at the moment.
No other ministers that...
No, Mr. Clark's got the job.
I can ask, who in the government do you think would make a good health minister?
Oh, the current ministers do an excellent job.
No one else comes to mind?
Not at all.
Who do you think in the government would make a good health minister?
Oh, David Clark.
David Clark.
Oh, David Clark's doing a great job.
I think David Clark is a fantastic health minister.
Who in the government, in your opinion, would make a good health minister?
Oh, I'm not going to answer that.
Not David Clark?
Labour MP Deborah Russell breaks away from the pack, and our reporter Charlie Drever. Next up, Phil Twyford. He's familiar with a political tight spot or two. He's been there himself.
Minister, in your opinion, who in the government would make a good health minister?
David Clark.
Slight delay there.
Uninterested or unsure? You decide. Speaker Trevor Mallard, a keen rugby fan, masters the shimmy.
I'm not making any comment on that.
Let's spread the net wider. National's Nicola Willis.
The problem for the Prime Minister is that she doesn't have many options. One name? Any name? I'm struggling. I think she is too. And clearly Dr. Clark is.
Ex David Seymour is lightning fast with a name. You just might not recognise it. Of the current government lineup, who would be your choice of Health Minister?
Look, I'm astonished that they haven't promoted Liz Craig. For some reason, they didn't even put her on the Epidemic Response Committee during the lockup. Liz Craig is a qualified doctor specialising in public health. It should be her, and you have to wonder if she's not suffering from gender discrimination in the Labour Party again.
A lot of people will go, who?
Well, the question is not do a lot of people know her name, but is she qualified to do the job? All my interactions with Liz Craig, she's a very nice person, a very intelligent person, and happens to be a Member of Parliament with 100% relevant qualifications.
Can David Clark stay on?
I don't think David Clark can stay on. I find him a nice guy on a personal level, but the truth is he has been physically and mentally absent as Minister of Health during the largest health crisis in a century. That's unacceptable. The real question is how he's lasted so long.
Not one to pass up a lead. We're keen to gauge first-term List MP Dr. Liz Craig's interest in the job.
Hi, it's Liz here. Sorry I can't pick up right now. Please leave me a message and I'll call you back.
So no word on the possibility of a doctor's appointment. While tonight TVNZ has a Colmar-Brunton poll, and we'll have more on that after 6 o'clock when we'll be joined by former Health Minister Jonathan Coleman. It is 19 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback. What do you think about the job of the Health Minister? Should David Clark stay in the position, or would you like to see someone else take over? If so, who and why? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. St John's paramedics say they're absolutely gutted that their employer has backtracked on its promise to pay weekend and overnight shift rates. The ambulance service says it's facing a large deficit for the coming year, with COVID cutting its fundraising and commercial incomes. It's now planning on cutting 100 jobs to save money, and paramedics will miss out on the penal rates they fought for during last year's strikes. Nita Blake-Person reports.
After 43 years in the job, there's not much this ambulance officer hasn't had to deal with. But the past few months have been particularly tough. He tears up recalling how hard it's been.
You don't know how scary it was, the first part of lockdown with this COVID. Hey, I'm 65 on the road. My first job out to a South African, just come off the plane, 25 hours in and out of airports. What your thoughts be going through now in your head if I told you that? That's come up on your NDT. I'm 65. Is this it? Is this it for me? Is this the last one? And what they do, the thing I'm looking for is the little perk at the end. We're going to get time and a quarter, time and a half.
He doesn't want to be identified out of fear of losing his job, but he's furious to hear that the penal rates, which cover weekend and night shifts that he and his colleagues fought hard for during industrial action last year, are now under threat as St John feels the financial pinch.
Mind the language. It's been the same bull that's been going on for years and years. They promise you something, and then just to shut you up so you don't. So the strike's over, and then they take it away from you. It just guts me. And we can always smell a rat. Is this the right company we're working for? They don't know what the books look like. What's going on?
St John, which is 70% government funded, announced yesterday that it would be cutting 100 jobs in a bid to save $30 million over the next financial year. Chief Executive Peter Bradley says the executive team will also be reduced, personal cars are going, and it's freezing pay increases for those in senior roles.
We won't be filling some vacancies as people leave, and we'll leave some shifts uncovered. But overall, we can reassure the public that those people that require an ambulance in a life-threatening emergency will receive an ambulance as quickly as ever before.
But the crews manning those ambulances say it's a story they've heard many times before. This paramedic says they're already underpaid, and without weekend and overnight rates, which were to be 25% on top of their hourly pay, they're falling further behind other health professionals who are paid extra for their unsociable hours.
I'd be on about $65,000 a year after 20 years' work. My colleagues, quite a number of my colleagues, are on the minimum wage. And those colleagues were with me at the coalface, facing danger, helping out the community, and they're paid the minimum wage, which I think is disgusting.
First Union Ambulance Coordinator Sarah Stone says their members are fed up and at breaking point.
The reason ambulance officers feel so strongly about this clause and the way they're being treated is this is the same story that we hear at bargaining time and time again. This is what we've heard for the last 10 or 15 years. We didn't apply for the funding. We can't afford to pay you. And they're not going to accept it.
In a statement, St John said it had begun paying staff an unsociable hours shift allowance at the end of last year, and the increased penal rates agreed on were contingent on affordability. It says it's well understood that St John's financial situation has significantly worsened since then. Paramedics RNZ has spoken to say if St John can't balance its books, then a new national setup needs to be brought in and be 100% funded. Peter Bradley agrees the current funding model doesn't work.
We rely on fundraising to run the ambulance service. We don't think that's right. It will change, but it's not going to change tomorrow. It will change hopefully next year. So we really appreciate the support from the public, but this next year is a big challenge.
But those on the front line say they've waited long enough to be paid what they're worth.
Given that we gave so much during COVID, we put ourselves out there, we exposed ourselves to danger and our families to danger, it would be nice to be recognised for what we did as opposed to being punished in some way by having our shift rates taken off us.
Mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Nita Blakeperson aho.
AJ Hackett, Bungie's owners, were jumping for joy after news the company would receive $10.2 million in government help to get back on its feet. But questions are being raised over whether the company, backed by wealthy New Zealanders, needs the money. Checkpoint reporter Nick Trowbridge has the story.
It's definitely a lifeline for us, and hopefully we'll have people coming here to do a bungee with us, and the effects will flow on into the rest of the community.
AJ Hackett majority owner Henry Van Ash was a happy man yesterday. The government is giving his famed New Zealand bungee company strategic tourism asset funding of $10.2 million. The taxpayer-funded bounce-back package comes in two parts. One half is a grant, with the rest available as a loan should the company need it. But not everyone's happy.
Well, I'm scratching my head now. Suddenly jumping off bridges
with a court attached to you has somehow sort of crept into the terminology of a strategically important asset. Let's call a spade a spade. Yeah, to me, this looks like corporate welfare.
That's economist Cameron Bagri. Bagri, formerly ANZ Bank's chief economist, has been quick to express his outrage, taking to social media to ask to see AJ Hackett's financials over the past 25 years.
Look, it wouldn't have mattered whether these guys were bloody on the rich list or not, to me. It still looks like corporate welfare.
AJ Hackett's parent company, Bungie New Zealand, is 50% owned by Van Ash and fellow South Island businessman John Ward. Trojan Holdings, which also owns ski areas Coronet Peak, The Remarkables and Mount Hutt, has a 40% stake in Bungie New Zealand. Trojan is controlled by former Queenstown Mayor and rich lister Sir John Davies. The remaining 10% of Bungie New Zealand is owned by Gully Holdings, controlled by Queenstown business figures Andrew and Claire Brinsley. Van Ash has so far claimed over $1.3 million in wage subsidies. He wouldn't be interviewed today, but yesterday on Checkpoint he responded to criticism of government money going to some of New Zealand's largest tourism operators, like Discover Waitomo and Whale Watch Koutou.
Well, I mean, we do provide a lot of good promotion for people, and a lot of people do our activities. So across all of those businesses you've mentioned, they are core parts of the community. I mean, Bungie has been used widely for the last over 30 years internationally as representing New Zealand's spirit of adventure as being one of the great things that people can do here. So I think that anybody that's travelled will see that, and anyone that's dealt with tourists coming here will know that they look at Bungie as being something they would love to do.
But not everyone is convinced companies as powerful as AJ Hackett need the money. University of Canterbury adjunct fellow Dr. Michael Goumet has been critical of companies not looking at whether they can bridge the gap themselves before seeking government assistance. A criteria states businesses must exhaust all other avenues of support before seeking assistance from the Strategic Tourism Assets Protection Program.
We've seen this with the wage subsidy, where organisations that are extremely financially wealthy have been able to access a taxpayer grant or subsidy, whatever you want to call it, while at the same time having huge sums of money in the bank. So to what extent has this organisation been scrutinised, and where's the business case that justifies giving a large sum of money? And, I mean, we don't have access to that company's accounts. I'm talking about the Bungie operations because, as I understand, it's a private operation, so therefore we can't access it, unlike, say, a charity. But on the other hand, how much scrutiny was given to that company to justify, A, can you in fact afford to carry this yourself, and B, is it in fact a essential tourist activity, and C, can the taxpayer afford it, and to what extent can the taxpayer afford it? So where's the hard questions being asked here? It certainly does make me wonder.
Meanwhile, opinion was divided on the streets of Queenstown today. Checkpoint asked locals what they made of AJ Hackett's big payday.
Too much money to be given to somebody like a company that makes so much. They've made plenty of money for years and years and years. Surely they've got a fair bit in the bank to get them through the hard times. I'm sure they would have got the wage subsidy as well, which would have helped the guys through, and they'll be getting the next 8 weeks, so why give them more?
Oh, I think it's all right. It keeps them going and keeps them ready for when, obviously, international comes back.
It could probably go towards better things. Yeah, I guess I feel bad for the people that's where like their jobs and money are in, but there's probably, I think, other areas in New Zealand that the money could go towards.
So despite a multi-million-dollar lifeline for one of NZ Inc.'s most iconic draw cards, it's clear not everyone's jumping for joy. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
Qantas is slashing at least 6,000 jobs and says it needs to become a smaller airline because of the pandemic. The Australian national carrier says its strategy will save $15 billion over 3 years, which it says is how long it will take before travel returns to 2019 levels. Our World Watch reporter Max Toll has more.
Qantas was flying high before the pandemic.
The Qantas Group entered this crisis in better shape than most. We used record profits to strengthen our balance sheet over the last few years. But this crisis has still hit us very, very hard.
So hard, Qantas has lately been burning through $40 million a week. And so today, the company's chief executive, Alan Joyce, who you just heard, announced that at least 6,000 jobs will go, including cabin crew and ground staff. International travel will bear the brunt of the cuts, which represent about a fifth of the airline's workforce. Alan Joyce says it's looking at being at least 3 years before global travel returns to normal.
Separate to the 6,000 job losses, about 15,000 people will remain stood down for some time. People from whom we have no work, but we will have work for them in the future.
That means some Qantas staff could be stood down until 2022. Terry O'Toole from the Flight Attendants Union says 1,000 cabin crew are facing unemployment.
We will be doing everything we can to come up with creative ways to reduce the number of jobs that are lost.
Quick to weigh in, the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison called the job losses heartbreaking.
These are hard days, Australia. They're very hard days. And our strength and our togetherness is tested on almost a daily basis, and Australians continue to prove themselves strong.
Qantas isn't the only struggling airline. In April, Virgin Australia slumped into voluntary administration. Scott Morrison says the government will look at helping out where it can.
We know that those sectors that continue to be significantly affected will need continued support. And so we're just working through the best way to target and deliver that support.
The first job losses at Qantas will be voluntary redundancies. The airline declined to be interviewed today, but in a statement said most of its New Zealand-based workforce are part of the continued stand down until the Trans-Tasman borders open. This is Max Toll.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, a deluge for Auckland overnight, but it's not enough for the reservoirs. Concerns of raising the bar to get a COVID-19 test has come too early and as winter illnesses surge. And New Zealand football CEO Andrew Pragnell prepares for a sleepless night as he waits on a 4 a.m. wake-up call to find out if New Zealand will co-host the FIFA Women's World Cup. We'd love your feedback on Ashley Bloomfield and David Clark on St James funding or AJ Hackett's funding and the Qantas job losses. You can get in touch by text 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now to get to the headlines with Susanna.
The Deputy Prime Minister has rejected suggestions the Director-General of Health is being used as a scapegoat for the government's failures over COVID-19 testing and quarantine. National Health spokesperson says the Health Minister's refusal to take any responsibility and his treatment of Dr Bloomfield has been appalling. But during question time, Winston Peters, speaking on behalf of the Prime Minister, said the Minister can't be held responsible for mistakes in the field. He says the problems are being addressed. With nearly 17,000 new cases, India has set another record for daily infections. India has had almost 500,000 cases since the outbreak began and close to 15,000 deaths of people with the coronavirus. A temporary hospital with 10,000 beds is being built in Delhi. The Solicitor General has told the Supreme Court the wrongs done to victims outweigh those of Peter Alliss. The convicted sex offender was last year granted an appeal against his convictions, but he died in September. The counsel to Minister to Peter Alliss said the principle of tikanga means the door doesn't close with death and an appeal is necessary to provide finality. But the Solicitor General said the Supreme Court should consider the victims. Auckland Council has today been grilling its own company, Watercare, over the management of the region's water shortage. Restrictions have been in place in Auckland for months now, and today councillors wanted answers about how the city's water is being managed. Watercare's chair says it is not possible to prepare for all scenarios, but the company is reassessing its approach. Russians begin voting today on constitutional reforms that could see the President Vladimir Putin remain in power for another 16 years. Critics have accused Mr Putin of trying to stage a constitutional coup via the ballot, saying that in the absence of a credible opposition or news media, the vote is likely to go in his favour. The 7-day ballot is taking place despite rising coronavirus cases throughout Russia. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and it's time now for the business news. And Nona Peltier joins me in the studio. Nona, Refining New Zealand. Okay, so it's thinking about becoming a fuel import terminal only. Well, what would that mean?
Yeah, so it's a refinery at the moment. In other words, it processes fuel and then on-sells it through pipelines and so on to, petrol stations, and of course the airport. Auckland Airport is another one of their customers. So they're thinking of just importing fuel, much the same way Gull, for example, imports fuel directly. It doesn't have a refinery, and that's how it gets its fuel. What does that mean? Well, the company has 400 staff, so that will be something for them to consider. So what they've done is they've come up with this initial strategic review. They haven't published their report, but one can imagine it's quite considerable. The company is looking really how to save money and survive the downturn.
So they just don't think that being in the refining business is actually worth it to them?
Possibly. So they've looked at various options over time. Like, for example, they were talking about biofuel, converting the refinery into a biofuel refinery, and then they've shelved that because that's not in the near future. They looked at doing like a solar panel plant. They've also shelved that idea. So they're not really investing in anything new at the moment. It's just basically everything's on hold pending this strategic review. So the next step is over the next few months, they're going to go out to the community and their stakeholders, which are basically the fuel companies. And then they're going to make a decision by the end of September on what they're planning to do. So at this stage, one of the companies that is a stakeholder in Refining New Zealand is Z Energy, and they're supporting this. They're thinking that this is probably the best way forward for the refinery company. So it may be that the refinery finds a new life, or it just gets closed right down and just becomes a straight importer of fuel, just like what we're seeing with Gull at the moment. Interesting times. The market thought that was an interesting report. Probably the share price dropped 2.5% on that review.
Okay. Now, New Zealand's imports have taken a dive. Over what period and how bad is it? Okay, so this is last month's numbers. Really interesting. So we are in a trade surplus at the moment. Normally we import an awful lot and export, and then, sometimes most of the time we're importing a lot more things. And at the moment, though, our imports are down $1.4 billion. And that is versus our exports, which are down only $350 million. So this means that we're exporting more than we're importing, and that's really good for our trade balance. So that means that we're in a good position. We have a surplus. And the kinds of things that we are importing still are basically face masks and some precious metals, which I thought was quite interesting. So precious metals, that was a 94% increase in, I don't know, maybe we're making a lot of jewelry, I have no idea. Or maybe it's used in some kind of interesting manufacturing. I have no idea. Well, I'd be interested to find out. I'm going to get onto that one. I'll be getting onto that one. On the other side of it, the exports, the kinds of things that are down, for example, is something we talked about before, which was the fish and, shellfish as well. I guess that market still hasn't recovered. So that was down 34%. $64 million has cost those exporters. So it's a fair whack. So you can expect that industry still really hasn't recovered much. And some of the other increases were, of course, in milk powder and that kind of thing. Interesting, though, we'll keep track of this. It just seems that we're importing less, and some of the falls were in motor vehicles and parts. Not surprising. Those two things tend to go together. And machinery and fuel, which was the one we just talked about. And what were the numbers from the market today?
So we had it was a crazy session overnight. The New York markets took quite a hit with concern over the coronavirus and other things, including the tri-states, that's New Jersey, Connecticut, and New York, imposing restrictions on southern states moving into the northern ones. That did not go down well in New York. And anyway, so you wouldn't have expected us to give us a good lead. We were down 1.2% today. That's a drop of 135 points, but still pretty strong for the market at 11,124. That's compared with the ASX around 5 o'clock. It was down 2%. And the dollar is trading at 64.2 US cents, 93.5 Australian, and 51.7 British pence. And that's really because because we're seen as a riskier currency. And right now, the risk is definitely, people are very concerned about risk. We've seen a lot of changes there in the market. So as long as the coronavirus is raging overseas, we can expect to see this volatility continue.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier. We look forward to your report on why we're importing so many precious metals next time you're in here. Northland and Auckland got a desperately needed downpour overnight, but parts of the Coromandel got too much, causing flooding and slips. Farmers woke up with new ponds in their paddocks and flood-prone roads at the base of the Coromandel were once again shut. Jordan Bond reports.
2 cars getting stuck in floodwaters this morning in Auckland was the worst of the most welcome downpour so far this winter. More than 50 millimetres, putting a smile on the faces of the city's water planners. But it piled up worse further east. Thames Coromandel Civil Defence Controller Gary Towler says the heavy rain proved more of an issue.
It's brought down a number of large slips on the state highway network, and I've just been through one on the koutou. There's a number of stop-go points around the peninsula. There's a lot of debris on the road.
All things considered, Gary Towler says they did well. There was some wind damage, but no reports of any serious problems. The Hikawai-Tairua Road, State Highway 25 and 25A, are both back open after flooding overnight. Further north, Auckland's water catchment areas had more rain yesterday and this morning than it did in the entire previous week. About 80 to 90 mils, the most since September 2019. The Mayor, Phil Goff, hailed it as a small win as the city plays catch-up on a severe long-term water shortage.
And the good news is that our lake levels in the last 24 hours have gone up by over 2% to 47%. The bad news is that we will also have, through spring, lower than average rainfall.
Met Service meteorologist Lewis Ferris says the rain is not done yet. It's slipping southward into Gisborne and Hawke's Bay.
As we head further into Friday, we see that heaviest rain move into Gisborne. We are going to see the largest accumulation about the ranges, so it could be 120 to 180 millimetres. So those heavy rains and the ranges will cause some effects, but the people down around Gisborne City won't see as much as that rain.
Lewis Ferris says the Coromandel will see some more rainfall, as will the Ruahine and Kāweka ranges above Hawke's Bay, before clearing by the weekend. For Checkpoint, Jordan Bond.
And Auckland Transport has said a section of Hunua Road in Auckland's south-east will be closed overnight due to a slip. There is concern raising the bar to get a COVID-19 test has come too early as winter ills surge and recent border lapses play on people's minds. Today is the first day the Ministry of Health no longer requires people with any cold or flu symptoms to get a swab unless they are high risk or connected to travel or to the border. Anyone with sniffles can still get a test if their doctor advises it. Amy Williams filed this report.
The number of people getting tested for COVID-19 increases by the day. More than 10,000 people were tested for COVID-19 yesterday, compared with 9,000 the day before, bringing the total tested so far to just over 368,000. It was busy at the St Luke's Drive-In Clinic in Auckland today, where people waited over an hour to get tested. Many had cold symptoms and preferred to be tested, despite the change in criteria requiring it for only those deemed high risk.
I probably would have, yeah, just because I haven't been feeling well. I want to know for myself and the people that are within my bubble.
They're dealing with the whole of New Zealand and we don't want everybody rushing out to get a test, only those pertinent ones.
Well, it seems a bit over the top, but then you don't want to put other people at risk.
The Ministry of Health's change in mandatory testing criteria for COVID-19 has surprised some, including Christchurch GP Dermot Coffey. He says testing is the only sure way to detect the coronavirus from common winter illnesses.
The problem with COVID is obviously that it can mimic these illnesses. It can be very mild, and if you have an illness coming in with people travelling into a country where there's already widespread of respiratory illnesses, where there isn't the checking, there's this surveillance checking. By the time it's realised that it's in, it's much, much harder to get it under control.
Dr Coffey says mandatory testing should have been kept over winter.
An abundance of caution is needed, and we've gone from essentially level 4 to level 1 really over the last 4 to 5 weeks. It's just too early. It's just too early for this. We were feeling confident 2 weeks ago, but the border issue has completely changed, I think, the overall feeling.
Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says an increase in the number of people getting COVID-19 tests is due in part to the emergence of common winter ills, and it'll be important for wide testing to continue to rule out community transmission. Fiona Bolden chairs the Rural GP Network and says the narrowing of criteria for mandatory testing is expected to lessen GPs' workloads, who until now have had to swab every patient with a sniffle.
We've had the surge of winter colds and flus that normally come along at this time of year as well. And what that's meant is that there has been more work for GPs to do around managing respiratory illnesses, which has involved us having to swab people as well.
Dr Bolden says the change in criteria will also benefit some patients.
Some cases have been quite annoyed at the thought of having to be tested when they've got what they see as just being a snivel. So it takes a lot of the pressure off us now when we don't feel that we have to do that anymore, and we just need to offer it to them.
The ministry released its guidance to health professionals about the new criteria last night. But Dr Coffey says there's no clear information about what the changes mean for those on the front line seeing the now lower risk patients.
What are we supposed to do? What level of PPE are we supposed to wear? It's very easy for them to say, look, you can decide yourself based on your own practice and based on the level of risk that you're prepared to take, but some bit of guidance from them would be helpful.
Dr Coffey says it's important anyone with cold or flu symptoms stays home to recuperate and seeks the advice of their family doctor about getting a test for COVID-19. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
It is 14 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A lot of you getting in touch about the Health Minister and the Director General of Health. Katie says media and the public are being ridiculous. People have been misdirectedly attributing Ashley Bloomfield with all the success of the pandemic response. He's been put on a simplistic and populist pedestal, says Katie. Dr Bloomfield is accountable. He's a highly paid CEO and he needs to do his $500,000 a year job. And Paul from Wanaka says, we never call for the sacking of our All Blacks coach when the team loses. So let's let our Minister of Health carry on with the rest of the season. We are the team of 5 million. Paul, do you reckon that's because we didn't lose for a very long time? And then after that, we did call for heads to roll, didn't we? And Vicky says, David Clark needs to go. Not a leader, not able to take responsibility, will throw anyone under a bus to protect himself. It also questions the PM's leadership, that she cannot or will not make the tough leadership calls. He is a very weak link. And someone else says 21 fatalities, no community spread, cases being caught at the border. We're in a good place. The attacks on the Health Minister and his team is gaslighting by the National Party and scandal-hungry media. Do get in touch. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Supreme Court has been told the Peter Alliss criminal appeal should be heard despite his death in order to provide finality to the case and restore his mana. If the appeal is granted, it could establish a significant precedent for how tikanga is used in courts up and down the country. Mediana Johnson reports from the Supreme Court.
In a packed-out courtroom and with a full lobby, the 5 justices heard how tikanga is relevant to the appeal of Peter Alliss. Mr Alliss, who was convicted of sexual offences against 7 children in 1993, was granted a hearing in the Supreme Court in the middle of last year as he sought to get his convictions overturned. But when he died in September, that hearing was left up in the air. The counsel for Mr Allis's estate, as well as Te Hungaroia Māori o Aotearoa, or the Māori Law Society, made the case that because of tikanga, it was necessary to proceed. Natalie Coates, representing Peter Alliss, said everyone, Māori or Pākehā, dead or alive, has mana.
Mana and the importance of seeking to restore and uphold mana is something that transcends death. A hara or a wrong is before the court today, or is before the court, and a door has been opened to seek to redress that. It's necessary for this case to continue, to get to a state of ere, or finality.
Mr. Allis's case has drawn significant attention. The Supreme Court will have to make a decision about tikanga with English-style law. And while Western law systems consider individual legal interests end with death, Matanuku Mahueka from the Māori Law Society says that's not the case with tikanga.
The essential position from a tikanga point of view is that actually, death in and of itself doesn't bring to an end a person's reputation or the need to, if you can, vindicate that.
Crucial to the argument that the hearing should continue is the concept of hara, or a wrongdoing which has been done. Mr Mahueka and Ms Coates say the hara extends not just to the late Mr Alliss, but to his whānau as well as to the victims and their whānau. Natalie Coates says calling an end to the appeal, which had already been granted, would raise subsequent questions for all.
If the matter stops now, there will always be that question lingering whether Mr Alliss would have been successful if he were alive. Having the case heard will assist, or at least get to an ear on the question that was raised when leave was granted.
But Solicitor General Una Jagos, on behalf of the Crown, argued the hara suffered by the victims outweighs that possibly done to Mr Alliss. She argued if the hearing went ahead and all Mr Allis's convictions were overturned, that would also leave an imbalance on the part of the victims.
In my submission, that will forever leave this matter for the victims in a state of unbalance, and the hara that they have suffered will forever be left unattended, unprobed, because as a matter of fact, Mr Alliss cannot be retried.
If the full hearing is granted, it would be the first time an appeal has been heard in this country after the appellant has passed away. It would also have major implications for how tikanga Māori is incorporated into law. It would potentially set a precedent for using tikanga Māori, specifically the mana of a person, as a reason to continue the appeal of a person even once they've passed away. However, Justice Williams, the only Māori Supreme Court justice, raised concerns that this would be handing over the interpretation of tikanga Māori to judges. The Supreme Court reserved its decision. O te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Miriana Johnson tēnei.
And political parties are ramping up their electioneering, with Hawke's Bay the battleground for the hearts and minds of voters today. While National leader Todd Muller was wooing farmers in rural Hastings, on the other side of town, the coalition government, courtesy of the Provincial Growth Fund, was spraying millions of dollars around. Anusha Bradley reports.
At the Hawke's Bay Regional Sports Park in Hastings, the Under-Secretary for Regional Economic Development and Deputy Leader of New Zealand First, Fletcher Tabuto, announced $5 million from the Provincial Growth Fund to build a hostel to help disadvantaged youth get into training and jobs.
It is an opportunity for 100 young people to come in during the year, 40 at a time, and to I suppose the most basic way to describe it is to be supported. I used to be a high school teacher, so I know what sports can do for young people.
The hostel will host sports camps run by the Hawke's Bay Community Fitness Centre Trust, and its chairman, Sir Graham Avery, says the facility will be a game changer.
Youths who are not in employment or yet in educational training from underprivileged communities to develop character, leadership and communication skills.
A further $2.8 million will be loaned to Hastings-based Hawke Group, which makes fruit trays out of recycled paper, allowing it to expand, creating 30 new jobs. And because it's election year, Mr Tabuto wasted no time reminding locals the fund has invested nearly $150 million in the region, and that the $2.4 billion spent nationally will create even more jobs than expected.
We will create 10,000 jobs through the Provincial Growth Fund. In fact, their numbers suggest it'll be closer to 15,000 by the time they've finished. So this is an incredible investment into our regions. I think Todd's on that page. He probably did.
On the other side of Hastings, National leader Todd Muller fronted about 40 farmers in Maraikakaho, where the government's lack of drought support and the conversion of farms to forestry were key concerns. Mr Muller says farmers are doing it tough.
It's been a really, really tough year, and they feel it. They don't feel particularly appreciated. They get a sense that actually, farming is getting harder.
And he also took a dig at Health Minister David Clark's treatment of Dr Ashley Bloomfield.
Well, I thought it was a disgrace, and I've called him a non-essential worker. Did it deliberately. I actually think he's a shirker, actually, and what I mean by that is that New Zealanders have an expectation that if you haven't done something right, or if you've dropped the ball, you're front.
Fletcher Tabuto didn't visit any farmers on his whirlwind tour of the Bay today, but says his priority is helping farmers get water storage for the region with funding from the Provincial Growth Fund. While Nationals held the Tukituki electorate since 2005, the majority over Labour has narrowed over the last 3 elections, and in 2017 there was just 2,800 votes between sitting MP Lawrence Yule and Labour's candidate Anna Lorck. Todd Muller will host a meeting in Havelock North this evening and unveil National's first hoardings and election campaign slogan in Napier tomorrow morning. In Hastings for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
It's been dubbed Canterbury's little seaside community who never gave up. 9 years in the making, it was Redcliffe School's grand reopening today after earthquake damage rendered the old site unsafe. The occasion was marked with tears, hugging, singing and some very special guests. Katie Tott filed this report.
After 9 years playing hopscotch with temporary sites, Redcliffe School's past and present students, parents and teachers have celebrated their official homecoming, and it's even got the Dave Dobbin endorsement. Earthquakes toppled the cliffs behind the primary school in 2011, but now the school bell is ringing just around the corner at a seaside Beachville Road site. On it, a $16 million campus boasting classrooms with kitchens, a far cry from the portacoms and makeshift classrooms used to date, most recently shared with the Van Ash Deaf Education Centre in nearby Sumner. The new school's got enough mat space and playground equipment for the current 200 students, plus up to 100 more. These students told RNZ the new surrounds are definitely going to make them smarter.
Our classroom has a big open view that you can look out to see the estuary and some cool furniture.
I also like the undercroft underneath the nets because it's got lots of really cool trees.
So much more space to play in.
But today was also time to reflect, because Redcliffe School very nearly didn't get a second chance. In 2016, the school was told it would have to shut completely. Labour MP for Port Hills, Ruth Dyson, recalled the dogged campaign that eventually prompted then Education Minister Hekia Parata to reverse her decision and get the new campus built.
There was no stone left unturned, no opportunity lost. It was a campaign of hearts and minds, of facts, of integrity and of passion. It was relentless and it was unified. The reward is this school. This opening is the highlight of my political life.
Special guest Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern told the students to learn the lesson of endurance and perseverance.
That if you believe in something strongly enough, you can make it happen. And I say that to our children especially. Never, ever, ever give up.
With shared waiata and the planting of a pahutakawa tree marking the start of a new chapter, the school's principal Rose McKerney sounded a note of satisfaction.
Today is a day to acknowledge all that we have done to get to this crucial point and to let go of the hurt that those hard times have caused, as well as to relish in the emotions of new beginnings in the most beautiful of surroundings.
And the students? They've never been so reluctant to go on school holiday from next week.
Redcliffe School's the best school ever!
In Christchurch, for Checkpoint, ko Katie Todd, TNA.
And time for some of your feedback before the news at 6. A lot of you getting in touch about AJ Hackett Bungee, which is getting just over $10 million in help from the government as a strategic tourism asset. I am absolutely disgusted, AJ Hackett Bungee, to receive $10 million, says this listener. They have been raking in squillions over decades. Most Kiwis have never even jumped, and now we have to bail out those multi-millionaires, ! Simply unfathomable. Warwick's got in touch to say Hackett Bungee gets the money. What about St John Ambos? That is on the back of, obviously, the information today that about, I think it is 100 jobs are going from St John's. And another person says AJ Hackett funding is ridiculous. Those in business in good times reap big rewards. The people plod on and don't share in it. But now they want us to pay. OK, so tax pays for them. What has come from their bank account? Another person says Hackett Bungee, hospital cleaners tax going to prop up this so-called business based on overseas tourists being dumb enough to pay a lot of money to jump off a bridge. Outrageous. The rich owners should kick in their own cash. And Carol has got in touch to say, give the Hackett handout to the desperately overworked 24 hours on duty ambulance life-saving heroes. And some of you getting in touch about the Health Minister and whether he should keep his job. This listener says, Megan Woods is the only option, but her current workload makes it impossible. Another person says they've heard from a reliable source that a homeless man walked into the Beehive today and is interviewing to be the next Health Minister.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Health Minister has adopted a change in tone this afternoon, showering the Director-General of Health with compliments. David Clark has repeatedly refused to take any responsibility for the recent border botch-ups and yesterday pointed the blame at Dr Ashley Bloomfield. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The opposition is demanding the minister apologise for his treatment of Dr Bloomfield, saying it was disgraceful. No apology has been forthcoming, but Mr Clark has told reporters he takes ministerial responsibility for good and bad in the health sector. He went on to heap praise on Dr Bloomfield, calling him an exceptional public servant. Dr Bloomfield declined to comment, but said his relationship with the minister is very good. From Parliament, Craig McCulloch.
The Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews has compared the state's latest COVID-19 outbreak to a bushfire. Cases today spiked for the 9th day in a row, the ABC's Elias Klur reports.
33 new cases have been recorded in the last 24 hours. 7 are in hotel quarantine, but it's the largest increase in more than 2 months. The Premier, Daniel Andrews, called for Australian Defence Force help last night, and this morning he announced a testing blitz in 10 suburbs in Melbourne's north, northwest, outer east and western suburbs. Mr Andrews says cases will continue to rise.
We will see these numbers go up in coming days.
Authorities are planning to test 10,000 people a day across hotspot suburbs.
Elias Klur reporting. A union representing paramedics says its members are devastated St John has backtracked on its promise to pay weekend and overnight shift rates. The ambulance service says it's facing a large deficit for the coming year, with COVID cutting its fundraising and commercial incomes. First Union Ambulance Coordinator Sarah Stone says members fought for a 25% penal rate during industrial action last year, but that's now off the table.
This year is a year where they're starting their financial year. They have started in the black. And what they've got is a predicted debt. And that predicted debt of some 30 million they've calculated at includes the payment of this shift pay claim.
But St John says the agreement of penal rates was based on affordability, and it is well understood that its financial position has significantly worsened since then. The Solicitor General has told the Supreme Court the hara, or wrongs done to victims, outweigh those of convicted sexual offender Peter Alliss. His death in September brought into question whether to pursue with the appeal he was granted in the middle of last year against his convictions. The counsel to Peter Alliss said the principle of tikanga means the door doesn't close with death, and an appeal was needed to pursue heir or fulfilment. But the Solicitor General Una Jagos says the Supreme Court should consider the hara done to the victims.
In my submission, that will forever leave this matter for the victims in a state of unbalance, and the hara that they have suffered will forever be left unattended, unprobed, because as a matter of fact, Mr Alliss cannot be retried.
Unuja Goes, the Solicitor General. The Australian Prime Minister has indicated his government will provide financial support to struggling airlines. Qantas has announced it is cutting at least 6,000 jobs while other workers are being stood down, some until 2022. The company says it wants to become a smaller airline to survive the pandemic. Scott Morrison says the job losses are heartbreaking, but a harsh reality of the current economic climate.
We know that those sectors that continue to be significantly affected will need continued support. And so we're just working through the best way to target and deliver that support.
In April, Virgin Australia entered voluntary administration. 3 white men in the US state of Georgia have been formally charged with the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, a young black man who was shot dead in February. His death was highlighted during the Black Lives Matter protests. The BBC's Warren Bull reports.
The case of Ahmaud Arbery went largely unreported until video of the killing emerged more than 2 months later. The footage went viral on social media and fueled public anger that the perpetrators had not been brought to justice. Ahmaud Arbery's name has been chanted at Black Lives Matter protests across the United States in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd. Gregory McMichael, a white retired police officer, his son Travis and William Bryan, who filmed the incident, were arrested in May. The 3 have now been indicted on 9 counts, including murder, aggravated assault and false imprisonment.
Warren Bull there. Auckland Council has today been grilling its own company, Watercare, over the management of the region's water shortage. Restrictions have been in place in Auckland for months now, and today councillors wanted answers about how the city's water is being managed. Councillor Desley Simpson asked Watercare how they got into this mess.
In simple terms, why? Finish that sentence. That's the question that everyone's asking. You employ well-paid people to deliver for us. Why are we in the situation we're in?
Watercare's chairperson Margaret Devlin told the councillors it is not possible to prepare for all scenarios, but the company is reassessing its approach. Prince Harry and his wife Meghan are believed to be ready to hit the lucrative speaker circuit. They've reportedly signed with a New York agency that works with high-profile clients, including the former presidents Barack Obama and Bill Clinton and Oprah Winfrey. The move is one of the first major steps by the Duke and Duchess of Sussex to engage in paid work beyond the British royal family. They will focus on such issues as racial justice, gender equity and the environment and mental health. People who use snapper cards, which are used on buses in the Wellington region, may have been targeted by a scam email today. Snapper alerted customers this afternoon to a phishing email that invited people to view a file on Dropbox. The company has advised people to delete it immediately and avoid clicking on any links. It's 6 minutes past 6. New Zealand football is cautiously optimistic their joint bid with Australia to host the 2023 Women's World Cup will succeed. The world governing body FIFA will decide the winner in a vote in Zurich overnight. New Zealand and Australia are favoured to beat their only rival Colombia, although New Zealand football's chief executive Andrew Pragnell says they're not celebrating yet. The vote could be closer than anticipated, with media reports suggesting the Africa Confederation could back Colombia, with some European votes also possible going the South Americans' way.
There's a lot of support, I'm sure, for both sides. And so, we've got some optimism. There's lots of signs of positivity, but we know that it's not over till it's over.
Meanwhile, Liverpool have moved a step closer to their first top-flight English football title in 30 years after trouncing Crystal Palace 4-0. If second-place Manchester City don't beat Chelsea tomorrow, the title will be Liverpool's. New Zealand Rugby has confirmed it has made a quarter of its head office administration staff redundant, resulting in 40 job losses. It's half the number the organisation initially thought it was going to have to lay off due to the financial impact of COVID-19. The Chief Executive, Mark Robinson, says the resumption of Super Rugby and the revenue that has generated means they were able to reduce the layoffs. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, how sight problems in primary school children remain undiagnosed for years due to inadequate screening. The push to go beyond minimum compliance in earthquake design and the breakthrough building that's shown it doesn't have to cost a fortune. British doctor and best-selling author Michael Mosley on staying well during a pandemic, the race for a vaccine and getting a good night's sleep. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight. Tomorrow, Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, rain with heavy falls, especially about the ranges. Possible thunderstorms about coastal Bay of Plenty. Strong to gale easterlies gradually easing. For Waikato through to Wellington, scattered rain, mostly fine tomorrow apart from isolated showers. Taumaranui, Taupo and Taihape, occasional rain, easing tomorrow. Wairarapa also Nelson and Marlborough, cloudy periods today, drizzle in the east. Tomorrow a few showers turning to rain about the ranges with some heavy falls. For Canterbury and North Otago, cloudy with occasional drizzle. For the remainder of the South Island, fine for most parts. However, cloudy periods in the east with persistent low cloud in valleys and basins about Otago and Southland. Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy. RNZ National, it's almost 9 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. National's change in leader has helped the party claw back some political points. The latest One News Colmar Brunton poll has revealed a boost for the party, but it's still not enough for them to win the September election. The poll shows Labour on 50%, a 9-point drop, and National winning 38%, a 9-point increase. Former National Health Minister Jonathan Coleman and political commentator and former Green Party Policy Director Dave Cormack join me now. Can I start with you first, Jonathan? Is this confirmation that it was the right decision to roll Simon Bridges?
Well, look, I think the Nats will be looking forward, basically, and I think it does vindicate that decision. I mean, look, obviously they're behind, but they're now back in with a shot. And, you know, to be 9 points up on that last poll, that is fantastic. Also, very crucially, 13 points for Muller in the preferred Prime Minister ratings. That's as high as Simon Bridges ever got, and that's well over 2 years ago. So, look, I mean, 50 for Labour is obviously great, but only a feud in isolation. Yep, they could, govern alone, but you've got to look at how those numbers have moved this year. Back in February, I mean, Labour were on 41. They gained 18 points in the next poll to 59. The Nats went from 46 down 17 to 29. They're back up again. This has been a movement all this year between Labour and National voters. It's core long-term National voters who went to Labour in the May poll. They're now starting to come back. And the key thing is going to be, what's the trend? Can Labour hang on to those voters? But look, obviously a strong position for Labour, but you've got to look at the trend, and we're still 3 months out. The other thing is, Labour's taken some big hits in the last 10 days, even on health, which they've been pretty strong on traditionally. They're now going to find that as National moves the debate onto the economy, I think things are going to get tougher. So look, Labour are at a great position, but they're like a runner who's well ahead looking back over their shoulder, and things are going to close up a lot over the next 12 weeks.
So, Dave, 9 points up for National. This is, well, one assumes the honeymoon period when Todd Muller would get the most significant initial gains. Is that enough?
Well, I don't think it's enough. It's a bit like when you first start losing weight. Those initial kilos are easier to come off, and then it starts getting a bit harder and a bit harder. So I think what we've seen is as Jonathan mentioned, National clawing back some of that vote that was probably natural National vote anyway, and really just rams home just how loathed Simon seemed to be. Todd hasn't really been inspirational or really anything, and yet he's managed to get higher than Simon did as preferred Prime Minister for years. He's just kind of a thumb-looking guy bumbling his way through, and so it's a good poll for everyone except New Zealand First. To be honest, the Greens will be happy on 6, ACT will be delighted on 3, and so everyone's got something to be happy about.
Todd Muller, do you think, well, when he first announced himself in the role, he said his absolute focus would be on economic recovery, no opposition for opposition's sake. He's about 5 weeks into it now. How true has he been to that mantra he announced on the first day?
No,
he's certainly been handed some gifts. He's been handed some gifts in the last week. I mean, if you look just yesterday, cancelling that rail to the airport, votes for prisoners, the only thing Labour can say they've done in the last week. And then, of course, we all know, the COVID border situation. So, look, I think Todd's been doing a great job actually pointing out the shortcomings of the current cabinet.
But what about policy, Jonathan? What about policy? Because at some point he's going to have to table some, isn't he?
Oh, he will. He's got plenty of time. 12 weeks. I mean, you've got to keep your powder dry. And the thing is, Like, David might not like the look of him, but national voters do. And I think what you're going to find, it's going to be the trend over the coming weeks. This guy does appeal to national voters. He's brought 9 percentage points back in the space of a few weeks, and he's going to bring back more. And I think this is going to end up being much closer than people might think 12 weeks out.
OK, Dave, what do you think? Has he stayed on focus with economic recovery and no opposition for opposition's sake?
No, I mean, it's been really adorable. They keep saying that National's the only party with an economic plan, and yet when he's been asked what that economic plan is, he's just kind of fumbled and blundered around and not actually had a plan. And so that's been cute. And I don't think we've really seen much in the way of policy other than their Job Start, which they keep falling back on and saying that's going to be the panacea for our future economic woes. And so, you know, calling David Clark an unessential worker, very funny, but it's just been uninspiring stuff.
So do you...
Well, the issue, though, Lisa and Dave, look, it's going to be how people feel about the economy in their homes. You know, do you have a job? Are you going to be laid off once the government wage subsidy disappears? And I can tell you tens of thousands are. What happens in Parliament? Look, the people around the country, it's kind of interesting, but a lot don't even notice. But they know what's happening at their workplace. And this is where the government has got a massive problem because, look, the Prime Minister showed great leadership during the health response, no question about it. But there are economic headwinds which any incumbent government is really going to struggle against. And Todd Muller has got plenty of time to release policy. He's got National's previous record, which, you know, Dave probably doesn't agree with, but he's sitting there as a very viable alternative, and this government's going to continue to struggle because apart from Jacinda and Grant, you know, the public's going to see these very unpopular ministers trundled out day after day, and National is going to start looking better and better. And they will want to...
OK, let's bring Dave in. I just want to get his... Sorry to interrupt, Jonathan. I just want to bring Dave back in here because, Dave, you know about strategy. You've worked as a policy director. I'm wondering what influence do you think his media team, Todd Muller with the new guard in there, Matthew Hooton among them, Janet Wilson, what influence are they having on his style, do you think?
Well, you can have the best media trainers in the world, but if you're just not a terribly charismatic human being, then there's not a lot that can actually be done. And I just want to speak to one of Jonathan's points around the huge increases of joblessness that we're forecast to get. If that is the case, and I think that National's track record of the way it's treated the unemployed could possibly come back to bite them. Historically, Labor have kind of been viewed as the nicer party towards those people who are struggling. They haven't cut benefits and the like, and so I'm not sure if that's actually a salient point that will really help National.
Hey, thank you both.
Well, I think it is very salient because actually when you haven't got a job, you want a government that will create one. You don't worry about the charisma of the leader. You want a leader who can actually deliver an economy where you've got a job and the money's coming in to support your family each week. And that's
Thank
where
you
National's
both.
going to be very strong.
Got to leave it there. Appreciate your time. That's Jonathan Coleman and Dave Cormack giving us their insights into that latest poll, which shows National up 9 points, Labor down 9. There are 3 new cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand today, while 2 people have now recovered from the disease. One of the cases was flagged yesterday, a woman isolating in a hotel in Rotorua, and the other 2 are men in managed isolation in Christchurch. The 2 people who have recovered are the women from Britain who drove the length of the North Island after being let out of isolation without having a test. The Director General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield, says they're now free to go back into the community.
The 2 recoveries this week are the 2 women who travelled from the UK who are considered recovered because they meet the definition of at least 10 days since onset of symptoms, or if they have not had symptoms since their positive test result, and at least 48 hours symptom-free. So they're classified as recovered.
Are they still self-isolating though?
Not if they don't need to if they've been classified as recovered because they are no longer infectious.
The 3 new cases are a woman in her 30s who arrived in New Zealand 5 days ago after flying home from Peru. The other 2 cases included a man in his 70s who arrived from New Delhi and a man in his 30s who came from Andampur in India. They were on the same flight which arrived from India on June the 20th.
In Christchurch, there is a quarantine section within one of the managed isolation facilities, so those 2 cases in Christchurch will be transferred and managed there for the rest of their stay. It's been previously assessed as a dual-use facility, one indeed that has an area set aside for that higher level of clinical care that someone with COVID-19 may require. Similar arrangements are being investigated in Rotorua, and in the meantime, the case that is currently in Rotorua is being transferred to the Jet Park Hotel to be looked after there.
The Director General says as of last night, the Ministry has someone greeting passengers at Auckland Airport to determine their health information. Previously, health officials were struggling to find the medical history of those coming into the country because they couldn't track their National Health Index numbers, but that's now changed.
Since a flight that came in 11 o'clock last night, we've had someone at the border working with customs to get the information on passenger arrivals and make that linkage with people on the NHI database so that we have that, so that by the time they leave the airport, we either have their NHI identified and we are able to therefore link them to other health databases, or if they don't have one, for example, they've been living overseas for some time, then we can work with the local DHBs to generate an NHI within a day or two.
Dr Bloomfield says the Ministry doesn't know who was on a flight until they land, so improving data collection at the border is vital for halting the virus. It is almost 20 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Meanwhile, cases of COVID-19 are surging in more than 24 US states as the country seems destined for a second wave of the pandemic. California, Texas and Florida, the country's most populous states, have set records for the number of new cases in a day. And now New York, the former epicentre for COVID-19, is asking people travelling from certain states to self-isolate. America's top health advisor, Anthony Fauci, begins this report from CNN's Nick Watt.
We're announcing today a joint travel advisory. People coming in from states that have a high infection rate must quarantine for 14 days.
So from midnight, 3 northeastern states, once our epicenter, won't let anyone in from these 9 southern and western states unless they quarantine. In Arizona, another record COVID-19 death toll.
Within days, we're going to be over capacity and dealing with a hospital crisis, in my opinion.
In Florida, more new cases today than ever before. One hospital system says they're seeing more young patients.
And if they're spreading the infection to older people, people with chronic diseases right now, we'll see an increase in deaths potentially 2 weeks from now.
Another new record case count today in Texas.
There is a massive outbreak of COVID-19 across the state of Texas today. We are making sure that the rules are enforced so we are going to be able to better contain the spread of COVID-19.
And for 11 days straight, Texas has set new records for the number of COVID-19 patients admitted to the hospital. Nationwide, in more than half our states, new case counts just aren't going down.
Basically, we're back to where New York was back in March, except that this time, I don't think that there is the political will and the public support to have these shutdowns.
Dr. Anthony Fauci says we need to get past mask wearing being a political issue. The Democratic governor of North Carolina just said he's making them mandatory, and the Republican governor of Florida just said he won't.
We advised from the beginning of May, we advised if you can't social distance, wear the mask. But ultimately, we've got to trust people to make good decisions.
And those well-known University of Washington modelers say we would save more than 30,000 lives by the end of the summer if 95% of us wore masks. But right now, we aren't.
CNN's Nick Watt there. Auckland Council has today been grilling its own water company, Watercare, over the management of the region's water shortage. At a council meeting this morning, Watercare said the city is experiencing its worst drought ever, despite recent downpours. The Water Management Agency is now reviewing its forecasting to try and figure out how the city's water situation got so bad. Jean Bell filed this report.
It was a wet night in Auckland last night, but today the dam's levels are just 47% full, still well below the usual 78% average for this time of year. Speaking to Auckland Council today, Watercare Chief Executive Raveen Jadaram says the city's drought situation is still dire.
The first 4 months of this financial calendar year have been the driest 4 months on record for Auckland. And so this is the most severe drought on record for us. We're very concerned that with the showers we get, that some of our customers may think, oh, the drought is broken, the problem's gone away.
Right.
So we have to keep reinforcing that, no, we still have a problem. Our storage lakes are low, the forecast is low.
Water restrictions have been in place in Auckland for months now, and today councillors wanted answers about how the city's water is being managed. Councillor Desley Simpson asked Watercare how they got into this mess.
In simple terms, why? Finish that sentence. That's the question that everyone's asking. You employ well-paid people to deliver for us. Why are we in the situation we're in?
Margaret Dalvin, Watercare's chairwoman, says it's not possible to prepare for all scenarios, but the company is reassessing its approach.
You can't build a system that is completely resilient, will completely provide every form of demand that's required. It's rather akin to saying we'll build our highways to meet continual peak hour traffic. So what we have to look at, and you're absolutely right, some of the things we need to go back and look on are what were the assumptions in our drought management plan, what are the assumptions in our capital programme going forward. Given the experience that we've had this year, which is an unprecedented dry period, what does that do to the rest of our assumptions? And that's the piece of work that we're doing now.
The Mayor Phil Goff says the council did not see the drought coming.
None of us have 2020 vision, and 7 months ago we had 90% of water in our dam.
However, he hasn't let Watercare off the hook entirely.
I think we needed more strategic planning than we've had, and we'll accept some share of that responsibility as you will.
A delegation from the Māori King's office also attended today's meeting to show the importance of the issue. Auckland Council wants to fast-track its application to take more water from the Waikato River. And Kingitanga spokesperson Rahui Papa says they are aware of their responsibilities to the river.
Your problems are our problems, and our problems are your problems. And so we are acutely aware of our duties of manaakitanga. Manaaki for the people, and manaaki for the taiao, for the environment, especially the Waikato River.
Waikato Tainui's Rukumoana Schaafhausen says the iwi is willing to discuss short-term measures for maintaining water supply, while long-term solutions were found. Mō te hotako o te ahi nei, ko Jean Bell tēnei.
Cautious optimism is the mood at New Zealand football as they prepare to find out the fate of their joint bid with Australia to host the 2023 Women's World Cup. At 4 o'clock tomorrow morning, either the Trans-Tasman bid or Colombia will be confirmed by global governing body FIFA as the host of the tournament. Both bids will be working until a few hours before the announcement, making sure no stone is unturned, with New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and Australian counterpart Scott Morrison even roped in to help with the final push. This afternoon, New Zealand football boss Andrew Pragnell told Clay Wilson there was plenty of anticipation for the decision.
I guess it's a combination of excitement and some nerves, although there's not a lot more to be done now. The technical report's completed, the messages have been delivered, and so we'll wait and see.
So you're just going to be at home by yourself in your office or something like that?
Yeah, dining room table actually. We thought about grander plans, but I think with people being so dispersed, we'll wait and see, and depending on how things land, we'll either be hopefully drinking a glass of champagne on Friday, or it could be a bit quiet beer.
In terms of the vote itself, there's been a lot of positive talk in the last few days, especially since Japan pulled out. How much did that boost your confidence, Japan pulling out? And is it as clear-cut as some people are making out here?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very close. Certainly, statistically, you go from 3 competitors to 2. Everyone's odds increases, or the 2 remaining competitors' odds increase. But actually, there's a lot of support, I'm sure, for both sides. And so, we've got some optimism. There's lots of signs of positivity, but we know that it's not over till it's over.
You're obviously part of Oceania, Australia's part of Asia. You can probably bank on those votes, but what do you see as the sort of major votes to try and get hold of in terms of the actual voting process itself? Yeah, look, I think we're not taking any votes for granted. There's been some really positive public statements out of obviously Oceania and Asia, and so that's great. So for us, it's about making sure that every other council member and all council members hear the same message. Yes, we're getting some positive affirmation, but we don't take them as a given, and no votes are given until it's cast. These votes in the past past, especially with FIFA, have been often influenced by political factors within the voting process. How confident are you that the vote's going to be made on the merits of the two bids?
It'll be really interesting. I think what we're most encouraged about is that the technical report and the scoring behind that has been published, online and publicly read, and that every FIFA Council member's vote will be published in the direction they've gone. So, I think there's an element there in the same way that a democracy works, that actually there's some public accountability whichever way it's cast. So we're relying obviously on the merits and just the strength of the bid and standing on its own 2 feet. We like the way the process has gone to date, and so we'll take some confidence in that, but know that nothing's a given.
There's obviously a lot on the line, but when you put that much work into it as well, it makes that anticipation of finding out, I guess, even more heightened.
Yeah, definitely. It's the work, and also it's the gravity of the size and scale of the event. It truly is a global event that New Zealand's never seen the like of before, and it's growing exponentially. This is the type of event that comes around once in a lifetime for a country like ours to host, and maybe growing so fast we could never host it again. So it's quite a significant milestone for football in New Zealand and for New Zealand as a whole.
How much sleep are you going to get tonight?
None.
And how do you plan to stay awake?
Coffee.
And that's New Zealand football boss Andrew Pregnell talking to Clay Wilson there. And New Zealand football will find out if they've been successful at 4 a.m. tomorrow morning. And first up with Rowan Quinn, we'll have the latest from 5 a.m, so do tune in. If you're just joining us, the One News Colmar Bronton poll has revealed a boost for the National Party after they switched their leadership to Todd Muller. The poll shows Labour on 50%. That is a 9-point drop for Labour. National winning 38% support in this poll. That is a 9-point increase. And that would mean Labour could govern alone on 62 seats. Greens would get 7 seats, National 47. And based on ACT's 3% in winning an electorate, they would get 4 seats in Parliament. I bet there is a bit of lounge dancing going on at David Seymour's place right now. We will be back tomorrow. Thanks for joining us. Have a wonderful evening. Our news teams will keep you up to date this evening.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Health Minister is refusing to apologise to the Director-General of Health, despite accusations he made him the scapegoat for blunders over COVID-19 border measures. Australian Defence Force personnel are being deployed to help with a massive testing exercise in parts of Melbourne after a worrying spike in new COVID cases. Paramedics at devastated St John has backtracked on its promise to pay weekend and overnight shift rates. And a lawyer for the man at the centre of the Young Labour summer camp scandal has told the Court of Appeal he will be unfairly vilified as a sexual predator if he loses his name suppression. Those are the headlines. We'll have our next news at 7.
During a pandemic, the race for a...
Tonight on Nights, Alison Balance uses radar to tell us which way the wind's blowing in Antarctica. Our overseas correspondent Peggy Revell is coping with COVID in Canada. Rachel Church puts a classic from Robert Schumann